This video is going to be something a little bit different to what I usually do as trip videos. It's going to be a blog of a research trip to Kisumu, Kenya, located in East Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm going to give a quick introduction of the project just for context, but don't worry, the rest of the video will be more of a trip description, trying to highlight not only some of the science, but also what it's like to become immersed in the culture of the area. The purpose of this project was to provide research exchange opportunities between North American and Kenyan scientists to compare the onset, genetics, and toxin production of harmful algal blooms in the Wynnum Gulf of Lake Victoria, and to draw analogies with the seasonal algal blooms we're experiencing in Lake Erie of North America. The project is funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation and led by Dr. George Bullerjan of Bowling Green State University in Ohio. The other co-PIs were Kefa Otizo and Mike Mackay, who subsequently moved to the University of Windsor after the project was funded. I was asked to join the project to fill another co-PI vacancy, and I'm operating out of the University of Windsor as part of the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research, where Mike Mackay now serves as our director. Project partners also included Kisii University and Technical University of Kenya, as well as the Kenya Marine Fisheries Research Institute, the government agency responsible for managing Kenya's fisheries and lake resources. First, a couple of stats about Lake Victoria itself. It's the second largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area, and seventh largest lake in the world according to volume, where it sits just underneath Lake Huron in terms of water content. A prominent feature on continental Africa, Lake Victoria is one of 7 African Great Lakes which collectively contain 25% of the Earth's surface liquid fresh water. The lake is bordered by 3 countries, Uganda to the northwest, Tanzania to the south, and Kenya to the northeast. Kenya shares only about 6% of the surface area, but a prominent component of that is Wynnum Gulf, a shallow outlet running to the east of the lake. Wynnum Gulf has an average depth of 10 meters, very similar to the western basin of Lake Erie. It's about 70 kilometers in length and between 15 to 30 kilometers in width. A quick shot of our North American team composed of graduate students and faculty members. And of course, the much larger team consisting of our Kenyan colleagues and their graduate students. We arrived in Nairobi on June 17th and stayed a couple of nights at the Hilltop Hotel, where we waited for our entire team to come by, as well as their luggage. Our first day we got to explore a little bit of Nairobi, first going to the Karen Blixen Museum in the state. The author of the book Out of Africa and famous 1985 film starring Meryl Streep and Robert Redford. After that we visited the Giraffe Center, which was founded in 1979 by the African Fund for Endangered Wildlife and serves as a ground for breeding Rothschild species of giraffes and releasing them to the national parks. They're credited with releasing over 300 animals to Kenya's national parks. They also have some feeding areas that you can feed the giraffes pelleted foods from your hand. We ate at the famous Carnivore restaurant, famed for its past use of wild game meat, and got to partake in some of the festivities of the place. On June 19th was our travel day. We boarded the Kisii University bus and traveled from Nairobi to Kisumu, 350 kilometers away, but because of the roads, it took about 9 hours. I enjoyed taking snapshots out of the window as we drove. We took a quick stop at the Rift Valley viewpoint to enjoy its scenery. Another stop was made at a small Catholic church, just to admire its architecture. The landscape soon shifted into a higher elevation, more desert surrounding type of vegetation. Lunch consisted of roasted goat at a small restaurant midway through our trip for the day. Our next stop was at one of the large tea plantations that was about an hour away from Kisumu and one of the major sources of nutrient loads to the lake. Throughout our stay in Kisumu, we stayed at the Victoria Suites Hotel. The next 2 days were spent at the Fisheries Institute, where we strategized our research and the 2 cruises planned for Wynnum Gulf. We dined several times at Dunga Hill Camp, a local favorite restaurant in the area. I was part of the first group to do a cruise aboard the RV Mbuzi over June 22nd to 25th. This 18-meter trawler houses 30 people. It has an onboard lab and freezer room capacity, as well as bunks to sleep overnight for brave crew members. Over the 4 days of the cruise, we visited 19 sites, taking water samples, sediments, zooplankton, and the occasional trawling for fish to collect fish biodiversity information. The first night we deboarded the ship and were shuttled to Kendu Bay as our port. We then took another van back to Victoria Suites, where we stayed for the night and were shuttled back to the ship the next morning. The crew stayed on ship while we stayed in hotels. On the second day, they did a couple of trawls for fish. This is a complicated affair that involves multiple crew members and the engineer. It uses the ship's winch to haul this large heavy net aboard the ship, spacers to keep the net open. It's complicated and dangerous, but the crew members were super competent and well versed in the methodology. Each trawl was about 30 minutes of the net in the water, but the whole operation usually took a couple of hours, and then there was all of the fish processing that occurred afterwards. Different species were evaluated, measured for size, length, and weight, and identification. Life aboard the vessel varies from ultra-hectic during water sampling to a lot of downtime as we move the ship from station to station. Our meals were prepared by the 2 onboard cooks who spent the full time on the ship. They were cooking all the time, making everything from scratch. They were amazing cooks. Ugali is the main starch that is served in Kenya in white or brown, but it isn't to everybody's taste. After an extra-sized helping was heaped onto George's plate by another Kenyan faculty member, George described the experience as the following. During the cruise, we passed by many fantastic shoreline landscapes. The second and third days were stayed at Homa Bay, where we deboarded and boarded the ship each morning. The port itself is a chaotic mix of open-air markets along the shoreline, people laundering across the pier, and scavenging storks feeding on debris of the cityscape. Our hotel, beside the smaller Glory Hotel, was quite exquisite, however. The next morning, Homa Bay was in full algal bloom, and the crew took advantage of this opportunity to compare and sample algal cells within the water column and also determine if algal toxins were present.
Yes, okay, thank you. Oh, you're prepared. How did you not bring photography lens?
Is this your actual water next to this?
All right.
I got me too, by the way.
Ryan, get the door.
Ready?
Yeah.
Get me too. You're
I'm
way
sorry.
off. You're way off.
I'm bad at this.
It's really wide angle. So you kind of don't see it. It's really wide angle. You'll look far away.
You're in the shot, don't look.
They did another couple of trawls that day, and the fish were processed as per usual. The largest specimen caught was a 1.4 meter Nile perch weighing 66 kilograms or close to 150 pounds. Everybody was impressed by this fish species, not Lake Victoria's record, but not too far off at 1.9 meters. Blocked by a low bridge, a smaller crew of students went out and sampled through the Rozinga Channel, which links Wynnum Gulf with Lake Victoria. This constriction point keeps the two water masses separate. However, this has dire consequences for the functioning of Wynnum Gulf. Because of its shallow nature and lack of water mixing, it is much more susceptible to nutrient pollution and harmful algal blooms as a result. That evening, thunderstorms delayed our return, and we didn't dock until the late night, watching the lightning strike the shoreline as we shuttled back to the pier at Homa Bay. It was a kind of surreal and also slightly scary experience. The final day of the cruise was much more chilly and a little more wavy, making sampling that much more difficult. We all hunkered down in our rain jackets as we moved from station to station. Back in Kisumu, we had to familiarize ourselves with tuk-tuks. These are the main taxis in the area, and they're a lot of fun. We often tried to cram as many people as we could into a given tuk-tuk to save on the fare. The other common option was a boda, motorcycles that will take you for a ride for about $1 or $2. It wasn't until the second week where one of the graduate students, Emily, finally received her luggage from Nairobi that got lost in transport. She was super happy to have clothes again, having to borrow and buy whatever clothing she can get a hold of. Returning from the cruise, we had a day off because the lab was closed, so we visited a local market, followed by an artisan market where we bought a few wares. In another market, I found a hot sauce with a really cool name. This was one of the experiments set up by a graduate student to test primary production in the rivers. They also encountered some hippos on their journeys. We celebrated Davide's birthday at a Thai restaurant. Our hotel koi pond went through an algal bloom. Kenya was in the midst of elections, and while sitting at Victoria Suites Hotel, a campaign walked by showing their signs of support for their preferred candidate. We returned to Dunga Camp restaurant a few more nights, enjoying the sunsets and the most delicious blackened tilapia I've ever had in my life. The next several days were spent in the lab at the Kimfrey Institute. We had to process all of the water samples that were taken, perform nutrient analysis, algal toxins, and I was dissecting fish for chemical analysis. On our day off, we arranged a shuttle from the hotel to Ruma National Park for our first safari. It was not far from Homa Bay, and it was really our first experience to see wildlife in their natural setting. The last day we had a breakout workshop, gathering together to share what we learned and plan for a future data analysis. That evening we attended a christening of one of our colleagues, and I always think it's an extra special experience to get to see somebody's home and interact with them in their own personal settings. On July 4th, we left Kisumu to travel back towards Nairobi, but we stopped in Nakuru for an overnight stay. One of the profs was a member of a sports club and arranged our stay there. The club was established in the colonial times, and some parts of the clubs still had remnants of that rather dubious history.
Excuse me. I'm looking for Baron Blixen.
Rajiv.
Yes. I wondered if you might tell me where I would...
not be here.
Well, I'm simply looking for someone...
On our last day of the trip, July 5th, we woke up extra early to visit Nakuru National Park. We wanted to take advantage of the safari in this city before driving back to Nairobi to catch our flight later that evening. The wildlife sightings were absolutely amazing, as well as the colorful pink flamingos dotting Lake Nakuru's shoreline. This was truly a highlight and fitting ending for our research trip in Kenya. I hope you enjoy the last of the footage from Nakuru National Park Safari. It was a truly spectacular place, as was Kenya as a whole. I have another trip scheduled next year with a different crew but the same faculty members. I hope next year's adventure is as wonderful as this one. As always, thanks for watching.